My father, he sold the house that was meant to be mine from my late mother's inheritance, and then I realized, oh, it's so he could fund his mistress. That's right before my mother passed away, we found out that my dad was cheating this whole time, and it was heartbreaking, so guys, I'm not gonna let this jerk get away with it. I told my aunt. I never thought I'd find myself writing on this platform, but like they say, there's a first time for everything. This is a throwaway account, by the way, because I don't want anything linking back to me. However, I do want to get everyone's opinions and comments regarding the situation. I'm very sure that people with daddy issues will relate to my story. So I'm 23, I've been staying with my Aunt Carrie since I was 18. She's my mother's younger sister who decided to never have children and get married, which I never understood because she's such an amazing soul. Anyways, I'm currently doing my last year of nearby college. I was lucky enough to get a full scholarship, which came in handy because once I turned 18, my father decided to disown me and kick me out of his house, only for him to later sell the house and buy a new one. So let me give some context, right? So you guys don't get a bit confused. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 15 years of age. She and I have always been close, and I was definitely a mama's boy. Unfortunately, the fighting got too much for her and she passed away 2 years later. Her funeral was organized by my aunt and I. My father was too busy living it up with his mistress to plan and arrange a funeral for his wife of 2 decades. He at least showed up for the funeral and played his role of the heartbroken, devastated widower. Anyways, the day after my mother's funeral happened, my father's mistress moved in with us. I was shocked to see how young she was. She wasn't that much older than me, and she looked young enough to be his daughter. Oh, she was such a pain to live with, and she was such a messy person who never cleaned up after herself. She was also mean and very disrespectful towards me, but I didn't care. Whenever I would complain to my father about her, he would immediately take her side and reprimand me. That's when I started spending a lot of time at my aunt's place. A year passed, and I graduated senior year with excellent marks. However, my father had made it very clear that he would not be paying for me to go to college. Luckily, I applied for a bunch of scholarships and managed to get one. I'd received the news on the morning of my 18th birthday. However, as I was about to share the news with my father, I found him and his mistress waiting for me in the kitchen. She had the evil, cheeky smirk on her face, and my father had a stern, serious expression. That's when he told me that I'm now an adult, and I need to be a man and make my own living so that I could stop leeching off him. I almost laughed when he said that because the only thing this man had been paying for were high school fees. Everything else was bought by my aunt. Anyways, he told me to pack up a luggage and leave his home. My heart shattered into about 1,000,002 pieces that morning. I couldn't believe that my own father was kicking me out of the house that I'd grown up in. The house that held most of my memories with my mom. Even though his mistress had destroyed the warmth of this house, it still had sentimental value. I later found out that my father had sold the house and bought a brand new one with money. I packed up my stuff and went over to my aunt's place. She was disappointed and livid with anger when I told her what my father said, but she took me in anyways and told me that we would get through this together. Later that night, she asked me if I had received anything from my mother's estate. I shook my head and my aunt frowned and told me that she would try to contact my mother's lawyer to see if anything had been left in my name. I then mentioned that before my mother died, she had told both my father and me that the house should be given to me, but my father obviously ignored it. My aunt then mentioned that my father was probably using the money my mother had left me too. Well, a few years have passed since the heartbreaking day, and I was finally in my last year of college. I was going to be graduating in a few months and had already scored an internship at a top IT company. Well, under the condition that I perform really well, of course. My father and I have not spoken or been in contact for all these years, and that's been bothering me. Yes, his brother, my uncle, has been playing the father role in my life. I still miss my own father, something my best friend Zane could not understand. One day, Zane and I were busy studying in the library when I received a text from an unknown number. I opened the message and immediately froze. My eyes could not believe what they had just read. Zane asked what's wrong, and I showed him the text message, and he frowned and shook his head. He told me just to delete it. I looked at him with shock and, told him that I was not going to do that. The text message I received was from my father, who was asking to meet up this weekend. I told Zane that there would be no harm in just meeting up with the man. Zane looked me dead in the eyes and tells me that it's a bad idea. He kept giving me reasons as to why I should not meet up with my father, and yes, all of his reasons were valid, but I told him that I was going to meet up with my father regardless. He told me that by meeting up with my dad, I was just asking for trouble. I sighed and told him that he had no idea how hard it was to not have your father around. I sighed and told him that he had no idea. His face softened up a bit, and I said that. He told me that he still believed that meeting up with my father was a bad idea, but he would support me regardless, which I appreciate. So, after studying at the library, I went home and found my aunt busy working. We greeted each other, and I asked her if we could quickly talk about something serious. She immediately started to look worried, and I assured her that I was not in trouble or anything. She then relaxed and asked what's wrong. I take a deep breath and tell her that my father had contacted me and that he also wanted to see me. She had a blank facial expression. She then asked if I wanted to see him, and I told her that I did. She slowly nodded her head and told me that she would not stop me from seeing him, because at the end of the day he is my father, even though he has not been acting like it, especially these past few years. She also told me that it's a bad idea for me to see my father and that he cannot be trusted. Basically, she was saying more or less what Zane told me, and then I told her I was going to meet up with him and that nothing would change my mind. She nodded and told me that she respects my decision even though she did not like or agree with it. After the conversation with my aunt, I sat on my bed and my mind started racing with so many thoughts. Am I making the right decision? I mean, why I was so anxious and curious to meet up with a man who basically abandoned me? I took out my phone and there were multiple messages from my father. This really showed that he wanted to see me, so I texted him back and told him that I agreed to meet with him. Update number 1. Hey guys, it's finally the weekend and I was meeting up with my father at a nearby McDonald's. He was already seated when I arrived and he looked very different. He actually looked older than he was. My father always liked dressing up and showing off, but today he was dressed up in such a dull casual fit. He saw me and eagerly started waving. When I got to the table, he stood up and gave me a hug, which completely shocked me. We sat down and he was just weirdly smiling at me. He tells me that I've grown so much and I just nodded my head because I had no idea what to say. He then asked how I was doing and what I was busy with. I told him that I was doing my last year in computer science. He looked at me shocked and asked how I was able to afford college. I chuckled a bit and told him that I've gotten a scholarship. He frowned and then muttered that I've always been the smart one. I then asked him how his life was going and he tells me that things were great. He also tells me that he and his mistress had broken up and that he had been single for a year. I was actually glad to hear that, and that awful lady broke up. He then started talking about how great his business was doing. See, he owns a construction company. I told him, okay, I'm happy for him and his business. My father took one deep breath and tells me that he wants to apologize for all the wrongdoings, especially how he treated me after my mother passed. He told me that seeing my mother in that state had been extremely hard for him. He also acknowledged that he had handled things in a very bad manner and that he was sorry for everything. He then took my hand and told him that the reason he had asked for us to meet up was that he could apologize and ask for my forgiveness. He explained that Heather, his mistress, had been manipulating him and that he had been stupid enough to fall for it. He further explained that he was getting old and that he wants to do right by me, which warmed my heart because my father was getting old. He and my mother had me pretty late in life because of my mother's fertility issue, hence why I was their only kid. He also said that he wants us to rekindle our relationship and that he wanted to fix things between us since he was the one who ruined it. I told him that I would love for us to work on our relationship. He smiled at me and then took out a document from his bag. He said to prove it then. He wants to prove that he's genuine and serious about working on our relationship. He wanted to transfer all the money my mother had left me into my account. He explained that he just needed my signature so that my mother's estate bank could transfer the money directly to my account. He also told me that it could take up to 4 weeks for the money to reflect. I was extremely touched by this gesture, especially because I knew that this money could help my aunt and me out. I signed the document without completely reading it, but I saw that it had my mother's details on it and the document also asked for my bank details. I thanked my father for doing all this and he said that he was just giving me what was rightfully mine. When I got home from lunch with my father and explained everything to my aunt, she immediately starts to scream at me. She asked me why did I sign something without getting her opinion. She also mentioned that she would have at least gotten a lawyer to look at it so that we would have been assured that the document was legit. I told her my father would never do something like that to me. He's changed. Well, guys, this was the biggest argument my aunt and I would ever have. Am I wrong for wanting to give my father the benefit of the doubt? Is my aunt right? Should I have first taken the document and given it to her so she could take it to her attorney? Update number 2. A few weeks have passed since I last saw my father. Our communication is almost non-existent now, but I would like to believe that the reason is because he's been busy with work. I mean, the first time, our meeting, he would text me almost every day, but now he's always leaving me on red. Well, I've also not received the money from my mom's estate. I know he said that it would take 4 weeks, but 4 weeks have came and gone, and still nothing has transferred into my account. I've not mentioned anything to my aunt because I know that she would just have only negative things to say, which is something I don't need or want right now. I was busy studying when I heard a knock at the door, and then my aunt calling me. I rushed downstairs and my uncle was there with a worried look on his face. I greeted him and he greeted me back. As my aunt was about to leave to give us space, my uncle told her that he believed that my aunt should stay behind and hear this too, since she had to ask him to look into it. I was confused, but I followed them to the living room, where my uncle broke the news. He explained to us that my father had stolen all the money my mother had left for him. I immediately froze and felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I asked him what the heck he's talking about. He sighed and told me that he thought that my father made me sign a false document and that he was probably forging my signature. I shook my head and I told him that he was lying and that my father would never steal from me. My aunt put her hands on my shoulder and asked me to calm down. My uncle further explained that when he contacted my parents' lawyer, who was a family friend, he told him that my mother's estate had been completely emptied because I signed off my share of her estate to my dad, which he found very suspicious. He also told us that the attorney had been trying to contact one of us for years, but it looked like my father has been blocking him from getting in touch with any of us. At this point, my aunt groaned and groaned and said that her gut had always told her to look into my mother's estate, but she never did because she didn't want to deal with the drama, but now she wished that she would have. I ran out of the living room and went to my room. To get my phone, I immediately called my father, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried sending him a text and a WhatsApp message, but all I got was one tick. I rushed downstairs and asked my uncle to text my father's number, which he did, and it immediately double-ticked, meaning that my father had blocked me. My mind starts to race with thoughts and my emotions then got the better of me. I broke down in tears. My heart felt like it has been stabbed. I had not felt this amount of pain since my mother passed. I could not believe that my father had used and betrayed me like this. My aunt pulled me into her arms and tells me that we would not let him get away with it. How could I have been so naive and stupid? How could I have trusted a man who left me with absolutely nothing and chose his mistress over me? I was not going to let him get away with this. He was going to pay. Update number 3. Hey guys, it's me, and yes, I am back for a full update. It's been 2 weeks since I've discovered that my father had used me and taken all of my money. Unfortunately, I did not have time to lick my wounds because it was the exam season, and I could not afford to fail. I could not let all of my hard work go to waste because of my rubbish father. Once I was done with my last paper, I went to see my parents' old attorney. He then explained to me that my father had gone and submitted a document that had permitted my father to take all my money. He showed me the document and then my signature, and I looked at that signature, and I chuckled and informed the attorney that my father had forged this, and that this was a different document. He nods his head and tells me that he would take this document to forensics so that they could provide proof that my father had forged my signature. The attorney and I agreed that we're going to build a case against my father and lay charges of fraud. I wanted to take everything from him, and I was going to make sure that he was left with nothing. My aunt and uncle were also helping me with the case. Since my uncle was in the police department, he had asked one of his buddies in the forensic department to analyze the forged signature because the attorney had told me that it could take months for them to get back to us. So my uncle figures that using his friend would make it go faster. A week later, I received an email from my uncle. The results had came back and his friend had managed to prove that my signature had indeed been forged. This was a huge breakthrough because now I could lay charges against my dad. As I was about to call the attorney, there was a knock at the door. I was home alone and my aunt was at work, so I went downstairs and opened it. And I was shocked at who I found on my doorstep. It was my father, and he looked awful. He had a black eye and looked like he's been roughed up. I asked him what the hell he's doing here. He asked if he could please talk to me, and I rolled my eyes and told him that I absolutely had nothing to say to him. He then yelled that I owed him everything because he was the reason that I was even alive. I shook my head and I chuckled. He started shouting at me that he had spent thousands and thousands of dollars on me, and he also mentioned that he had spent some money on sending me to the best schools, buying me the latest gadgets, etc. And I told him I wasn't going to listen to this nonsensical crap. He then yelled that my aunt's house was rightfully his, because he was the one who helped her with the mortgage many years ago. I rolled my eyes because I knew he's a liar. My mother was the one who had helped my aunt. I then told my dad that I was going to file a charge of fraud against him. I also told him that I knew that he forged my signature and that he has been hiding my money from me. My father looked as white as a ghost. I told him that I was going to destroy him. He then got to his knees and starts to cry. He was actually begging and pleading for me to not take him to court. He confessed to tricking me and forging my signature. He also confessed that the only reason he had met up with me was so that he could get my signature. I just shook my head in disappointment, and he tells me that Heather was the one who had forced him to do it because of their financial situation. He admitted that he had actually gone broke about 6 months ago, and he had closed down his business because it's gone bankrupt. He also admitted that Heather had been using him and somehow managed to change the house's ownership on the deed. Well, she was now the sole owner of the house, and she kicked him out a few days ago and immediately just moved in with her boyfriend. Oh, man. I could not believe what I was hearing, but I wasn't too surprised about it. I'd always known that Heather never truly loved my father and that she was just with him for the money. So he asked if he could stay with my aunt and me for just a few days. I shook my head and told him that he could not. I told him that this was his karma and he has to deal with it, all on his own. I slammed the door in his face and locked it, and I thought that would make him leave, but he starts to bang on the door, screaming all sorts of cuss words and insults. He even threatened to break the door down. He continued with this behavior for a good 15 minutes, and then I saw the security company car pull up. Well, guys, they asked if I knew my father, and I told them that I have no idea who he was. He started calling me sorts of names while they handcuffed and took him away. It was very, very messy. Wow. Anyways, I felt that I had done the right thing, but at the same time, I couldn't help but feel just a tad bit guilty if I'm being completely honest with you. Anyways, guys, I don't know. Was I wrong for not helping him? Please, I'm begging you to let me know. Updates number 4. Hey guys, it's me. So a few months have actually passed since the day my father was taken away by the neighborhood security company, and I have not seen him since that day. Despite going through all these challenges, I managed to pass all of my subjects really well and graduated top of my class. My aunt and uncle threw a graduation party, and I invited all my friends. I also got the internship, which was the cherry on the top. I start my new job on Monday, and I'm stoked. This was something I worked extremely hard for, unlike my father. So I did lay charges of fraud against him, and the case is ongoing, in court, which is what the attorney wanted, so that when my father is found guilty, he'll get some sort of prison time. My father's been trying his absolute best to contact me, but I blocked him on everything. Luckily, he isn't allowed to be near me because I filed a restraining order. I know that all of this sounds extreme, but I mean, this man has put me through hell, my own father. Also, the money that my dad stole will be transferred to my account. Well, what's left of it. During the investigation, it was found that Heather had forged the deed of the ownership, which meant that the house was not under her name. So it was given back to my father, but because of the fraud charges I had laid against him, the house had to be sold so that it could be made up for the money that he had used that belonged to me. Apparently, Heather and her boyfriend moved to a whole different state. I honestly hope that she'll face her karma someday, because she put me through a hell also. Sometimes I question myself. I ask myself if I truly did the right thing. I mean, am I about to send my own father to jail? And he's basically losing everything, yes. He's staying with a relative currently, but has no means of income because of all his accounts being frozen. I know most people say that revenge is sweet, but for some reason, it doesn't feel sweet right now. Anyways, that's it.